think it is illustrative as we move into a circular economy that is more a part of nature than apart from nature, a circular economy where we position ourselves not at the top dominating nature, but within nature, part of nature, that we learn nature's methods of recycling and of particularly innovation. And we see all these here in Hawaii, which is a new land still by comparison to other lands. And it's a land that is bereft, actually, of minerals, rich minerals in the soil, because they are washed very quickly by the rain and dissipated. It's a thin soil, a relatively low quality soil, and yet a rich and abundant and verdant set of species here, as we all know, in extraordinary variety. And it's partly that the shortage of resources that leads to that innovation, that leads to the species diversification and the tremendous diversification that we have here. And many different systems of recycling, from fermentation and pyrolysis to hydrolysis to I'm going to try to study these and have examples that I can use as we go. But we see that mechanical recycling, the traditional approach that I've taken all my life, we know that in the human economy now, mechanical recycling is tremendous for certain materials like aluminum, like paper, like certain types of plastics. But it suffers from the laws of thermodynamics, the entropy that leads to degradation every time materials are reused. And so with a lot of materials, you can only use them 3, 4, 5, 6 times before they lose their fiber integrity, before they become too contaminated to use again. But nature doesn't take the leaves from the trees and reattach them to the trees. Everything is in a process of degradation and reintegration here in Hawaii, and you can see it and feel it while you're here. So it is a tremendous learning center, and I'm happy again to make the sacrifice to be here for it. Welcome everybody to what I think will be a really interesting, inspiring, and also pragmatic discussion of EPR, Extended Producer Responsibility. And this is the circular economy in action. This is a means by which we are seeking to emulate the processes of feedback and adaptation in nature by assuring that the costs of materials that we're using in the economy are fed back to the producers, to the brands typically, so that those costs are recognized in the economy, and so that somebody benefits by reducing those costs. Somebody directly benefits by reducing those costs. And so we're going to hear from 3 experts in this arena. We're going to hear from one who is overseeing the entire area of circularity, one of the leaders in bringing people together around the circular economy, John Smieja, recently from Trellis Group, and now doing his own gig here. And we are very pleased to have him with us. Then we're going to have Mark Murray talk about, who is the CEO of, or the executive director of Californians Against Waste, a group with which I have had some association over the years. And Mark will be talking about SB 54, California's new broad EPR system for packaging, which is going to result in billions of dollars of investment in new recycling capacities, and has the potential, certainly, for global impact. Not only because we'll be doing this recycling in California, but the technologies that are developed, the methods that are developed to do so, could be applicable, certainly globally. So we'll hear a bit about what's happening in the regulatory design now, which is where that has moved. And then we will also be hearing from Heidi Sanborn, who will talk about the explosion of EPR legislation across the country and what this means for our entire materials economy. So I'm excited to have folks here for this. So let's dive into this. We are going to look at circular economy overall, and John Smieja is going to help us to do that for just a couple minutes here. And then, of course, dive into EPR and the pragmatic application of some of these principles in law. So, John, I would love to hear a little bit of just of your story, your personal story, how you found yourself in the area of circularity, and then give us a sense of what is the circularity landscape today? What do we mean by a circular economy?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. Hi, everybody. I got a chance to meet a few people in the breakouts, but I'm John Smieja. Until mid-May, led circularity at Trellis. You may know it as Green Biz Group, rebranded last year. Um, how did I get into this space? I had a long, winding road to where I am now. I grew up on a farm in rural Minnesota and got interested in science generally uh, through just exploring on the farm. Ended up with a degree in chemistry, which is not really farm related, but didn't know what to do with it. So I went to graduate school. If anybody knows any soon to be graduating college folks, do not let them go to graduate school if they're just doing it because they don't know what else to do. That was a really bad reason for me to spend 5.5 years getting a PhD in chemistry. Uh,
Nobody ever does that, ever, John. Nobody ever goes to grad school just because they're not sure what to do.
I mean, it's one thing to get involved in a 1.5 years or 2 years master's, but a PhD program is a whole nother story. Anyway, when I got out of the lab in graduate school, I didn't know what I wanted to do still. I definitely did not want to work in a lab anymore, and I was interested in sustainability and climate change because of my graduate research, which was trying to close the liquid fuel cycle. So I was developing catalysts to turn CO2 and water back into liquid fuels, somewhat successfully, very much unsuccessfully, because we're still not doing that at scale. But ended up at Steelcase, the office furniture manufacturer, doing as their environmental chemist. So I was digging into the supply chain, trying to figure out what chemicals were coming in with the parts and products we were buying, and then assess those against human and environmental health concerns and optimize the worst actors out of our products. It was a very fun job. I got a lot of laughs and crooked looks when I asked suppliers to give us full chemical declarations on everything coming into our products because they
Yeah.
weren't used to that. And I quickly sort of realized that that was one of the major problems with our economy, right? That the people that are making products don't even know what's in them, much less the people that are using those products.
Yeah.
Um, and through that, the sustainability work grew. I ended up leading a sustainable design team at Steelcase. Went to Anderson Windows, where I was the product sustainability manager and then corporate sustainability manager. And through all this, I got really interested in waste. Manufacturing waste and end of life waste is a really big product problem in the window and door industry. There's a lot of custom sized products that therefore require a lot of waste to manufacture. And we were trying to figure out how to eliminate that waste. And then we were also trying to figure out what we could do with products that we were taking out of people's homes, especially the glass, which currently doesn't have a very good home in most places and ends up in the landfill. So that got me interested in waste, which then got me interested in circular economy. And I ended up at Trellis, leading circularity there, which really involved planning the content for the conference, planning content for our peer learning network that we had for people working at large corporates, and writing for our website. So that job sort of gave me this.
Broad, say broad, I was going to say, this broad set of participants at the circularity conference that shows the breadth of circularity. It's not just recycling. It's not just a simple process of recycling. It's an array of different technologies and ideas that are all founded in some of the principles of nature and applied to the economy.
Yes, that's a great way to put it. And Yeah, we had a really good community around the circular economy, and I learned a ton while I was in that role. I was going to share some images, but I see sharing is off. So I just put the link to this presentation that I was going to show in the chat if anybody wants to check it out. But basically, as we think about the circular economy, I mean, a lot of people are probably familiar with this, but just to ground us all, the goal of the circular economy is to eliminate waste and pollution, circulate products and materials at their highest value indefinitely. And third, and one of the ones that's often ignored, and Bill brought it up earlier, is regenerate nature. Um, if there's anything that comes of this, it's that we should not forget that third one, because part of what's happening in our current linear economy is that we're degrading nature quickly to get more and more materials to feed all of our various material wants and needs. Um, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, as many probably know, are sort of the leading thought leaders in this space, and they've come up with this butterfly diagram to show all the various ways that we can keep products at their highest and best use indefinitely. And I think what's really important here to see, especially as we look at the right side of the butterfly diagram, which is basically the finite materials, not the biomaterials, but the finite materials that are part of our economy, including things like plastics, metals, etc., is that we are better off keeping loops small. And by keeping loops small, I mean sharing, maintaining and prolonging the life of products, figuring out ways to reuse and redistribute products, refurbishing and remanufacturing products. And when all else fails, that's when we should be talking about recycling. Recycling should be a method of last resort when it comes to the circular economy. And therefore, what we need to think about very often is design. We need to start thinking about circularity at the design phase of the product, not at the end of use phase. And so the best way to create a sharing economy, create an economy where products are maintained at their highest and best use and can be reused and refurbished, is to design them for that purpose in the first place. Um, Also, thanks, Doozy, for sharing these slides. If you go to the next slide, this is just a thought experiment I've been thinking about for the last year or so. And I think it leads into this discussion about EPR quite well. There are products in our economy that already sort of fit into a circular economy, and we've built the business models for a circular economy, and we've already started to see some real progress in the circular economy. And those things are in the middle of this graph. So those are first and foremost probably automobiles and heavy machinery. The reason that these fit into a circular economy well, the reasons, I guess there are multiple. One, they have a lot of value in them, right? We spend a lot of money on them up front, so it's worth keeping them in use as long as we can. This is especially true for heavy machinery, but is also very true for automobiles. Number two, we use them often. They're the kinds of things that we use every day or every other day. Quite frequently, we're using these products, and so they're front of mind to us. They're not single use, they're multi-use over multiple years, but not a lifetime that's so long that technologies change considerably and make them hard to plan for the future. And also, the third reason that all of these products in the middle are sort of already fit for circular economy is that the brands that make them have built the business models to get them back or to keep tabs on them throughout their lives. So if you think of the auto industry, you might not think of these as cottage industries, but used car lots, uh,
Yeah.
mechanics, and body
Mhm.
shops. These are all cottage industries that have grown up to support the circular economy for automobiles.
Mm.
We have the same thing for heavy machinery. We're starting to see more and more of that for consumer electronics. So, really, the things in the middle of this could and currently, in some cases, are fitting into a circular economy without significant policy levers or sticks to make people do it.
And something I'd love to just point out is that this part of what you see there, what you're describing with that is that once you have a large species, if you will, like the automobile industry, mass producing automobiles, and you think in these circular terms, then that births an array of smaller species, in this case, smaller businesses, smaller enterprises locally based and broadly based, that provide many, many more opportunities, and the system diversifies. Diversification here begins to happen. The industrial economy masters uniformity and generalization. Everybody becomes the same. The systems are the same. The philosophies, the thinking. We have two ways of thinking politically. That's it. We have two genders. That's it. We have two, it's very, very conformist. But when we begin to think in this circular term, we develop all of these individual niches, which you see here in Hawaii, niches between all the larger dominant species. And that diversification enriches the whole environment and helps us to preserve resources over the long term.
Yeah, love that. Ron, did you have something to
I
add?
had a quick question for you, John. Couple of things that are kind of very effective that we have seen in almost everything we do in the corporate world. I come from a very significant amount of corporate experience myself globally. One of them is money drives a lot of things. No question about it. And as long as there is an attractive proposition for people that are investing and or gaining from an activity. And the second part is particularly with regard to circularity. I've been working with some of these companies like Bayer and BASF and other people. They're all creating trusted, data-driven exchanges. Just like you have carbon exchange, you have energy exchange, water exchange. One of the most significant things that can benefit us is the circular resource exchange, where people know what's where to look. And that usually is the most cumbersome, most complicated, and most unreliable information out there in the world. If we can come up with something that really does a very reliable data management system that addresses particularly a circular or circularity exchange, as you might want to call it, it'll be fantastic. And any initiative, I think there are a few, but nothing big that's really coming our way. We are very involved in applying blockchain and AI to create these platforms. What we don't have is the circularity exchange that we can connect to and make it a network effect. That's my thought here.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I think as we think, like I often think in terms of the auto industry because I do think they
Yes.
either are or can be a leader here. I mean, they've got they've already built this up over time, not for the circular economy purpose, but for other purposes. They've got I can never remember what it stands for, but the IMDS, where
Oh yeah,
all
I
of,
mean you go with the bill of materials,
yeah,
every auto part that we do. Yes.
and also what they've done, and it's clear that there's an economic driver here, is they've offered vehicles for lease, for
Mm-hmm.
rent, for resale. Like these are all reasons why it already fits into a circular economy. So those are really good points. And we're seeing more and more of that as we stretch out too, right? You can now get computers and cell phones as a lease as well instead of buying them outright. You can get heavy machinery in the same way. So I think any sort of sector of the economy where you can build a secondary market without regulatory push, there's a big opportunity for a circular economy,
Yes.
especially if you start designing for circularity up front, which the auto manufacturers are now starting to do. The big three here in the US now have circular design studios where they're trying to limit the material palette. They're trying to attach things to each other in different ways to make them more repairable, refurbishable. The issue, of course, then is we can get out to the extremities of this graphic. I'll touch briefly on the right side. In the built environment, whether it's furniture or buildings or roads or bridges, we often are challenged with the circular economy because of the long lifetimes of these products. So as a window, like when I worked in the window and door manufacturing, we wanted our windows to be in houses for 50 plus years. It's really hard to design a product for 50 years from now to be circular because you don't know what the world's going to look like. And so those sort of extremely long lifetime products that can sometimes be less used by an individual. So you think, a road or a bridge is sort of a common problem for everyone, not one person thinking about it because they're driving it every day. Those can be difficult, and we're starting to see some policy come in on that end of the spectrum that can help guide towards a circular economy, like deconstruction policies, right? So a deconstruction policy in a city instead of demolition can help put a lot of those materials back into the economy rather than going to waste.
Yeah. See, one of the things that you could
We're
probably
going to need to wrap this discussion.
sure.
Move to Mark and Heidi, and then we will have a chance for all to kind of dive
All
in.
right.
So very briefly then, on the left side, single-use products or rarely used products like plastics and packaging and textiles, the materials are low value. People don't value them as much. They don't use them very often, if at all, more than once. And so therefore, the incentives to take those products back and make those products circular are limited. That's where EPR steps in. And sorry, that was longer than I expected it would be, but that's, I think, sort of how I was going to tee up the EPR discussion by saying that in some cases, policy is needed to drive a circular economy because the financial incentives without it can be tricky.
Terrific. Well, thank you, John, and that's the perfect entree for Mark Murray. Mark is a longtime friend of mine. God, how many years, decades, and the executive director at Californians Against Waste, and where I used to reside in that position as well, and one who has helped to shepherd recycling legislation, almost every piece of recycling legislation, I would dare say every piece, and a lot of other legislation as well here in California. And we now have this exciting moment of Senate Bill 54 having been passed, and regulations being crafted for SB 54, which had been caught up in the political process. I don't know if we want to dive into any of that, any of the interesting, presidential politics that begin to affect California recycling policy. But Mark, can you tell us what's up with SB 54? There's a tremendous amount of money that's going to be spent to implement SB 54 and opportunities to make it a contribution to the planet. What's up with SB 54 in California?
Sure. So thanks a lot, Bill, and thanks a lot, everyone. And let me just say that the conversation about SB 54 that maybe we're going to have today is a lot different than the conversation that we might have had 6 months ago. And so I'll just say that I may have been a little bit more optimistic 6 months ago than I am today, in that maybe thought that that we might have cracked the code in terms of industry, environmental, government partnership in advancing producer responsibility. And boy, it just seems like the SB 54 process has fallen into the same old traps that many of our other policies have fallen into. That said, there is no mistaking that the SB 54, so SB 54, comprehensive packaging, single-use item, producer responsibility law with a combination of a very detailed combination of rates and dates and definitions of what's recyclable, what's not recyclable. And there is no mistaking that it has brought brand owners together, material producers together, in a way that no other policy has done. And so I think in that respect, it represents a very important opportunity. We're in the midst right now of quibbling over the details of implementation. So we're in the second round of a regulatory development stage. The first round was derailed by the governor's office after there was a preliminary regulatory framework, and now we're kind of starting that process over. And I'm not sure going into the details of that is really important. We're just kind of quibbling over a lot of details. in terms of who's going to have to do what and what kind of timelines and who's going to be included and who's going to be exempt. So the key thing here is that whether you're coming from the environmental side, which at the moment is a little frustrated with the starting over, or you're coming from the brand owner manufacturing side and thinking, my God, we've been doing this for 18 months on the regulation, and the legislation, passed more than 2 years ago, and how come this is taking so long? And I think I don't want to, I think maybe even piggybacking on John's comment earlier, is that sometimes the best producer responsibility systems are the ones that are invented as a result of economic reality, or material scarcity. And it seems like we've been spending the last 4-5 decades trying to mimic producer responsibility policies that emerged from scarcity, from energy conservation demands. I feel like I've spent my whole career trying to mimic what the aluminum can industry figured out in the 1950s and the 1960s, that it was cheaper to get their cans back than to have to produce virgin aluminum. So I want to just, that's kind of my big picture view, is that we haven't gotten it perfect. We haven't gotten it perfect with any of our policies, whether it was a command and control policy from the 1980s or 1990s, or with our extended producer responsibility policies today in California on a spectrum of materials. That said, we're doing the best we can. Bill?
Just as a comment to that, I think there's a great lesson in what you just said, because one of the things that I've learned in a few decades as an environmentalist is that at first, I look at the world as it is and I say, well, this is the way it should be over here, and I want to mandate that it's this way. This is how it's going to be, A, B, C, D, E. And I know that when I've done that in legislation, which I have on occasion, it usually doesn't turn out well, because conditions change and realities change. And I am not smart enough to figure out the path that materials should be following, even if I think I'm pretty darn logical. Nature is much better. And just putting a price on resources, this is why the magic of just putting a price on resources creates that scarcity effect that enables all of this innovation to happen. And so it's important when we look at the regulatory process to try to minimize the regulations. I think my judgment is, and allow the costs to impose the scarcity and trigger the innovation. But in a political system where it is advantageous to politicians to be making a lot of decisions that have a lot of economic impact, completely unrelated, of course, to the desire to raise political dollars for, seeking offices and so on, there's a tendency to want to micromanage. And for many other reasons, things can become very complex. And you can have all of these great plans that
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think you're 100% right. I was, 2 decades ago, 3 decades ago, Bill, we were absolutely 100% right about all of the policies that we advocated, the command and control policies, and now I don't know what's happened. They just didn't do it exactly the way that we had in mind. But so I guess here's in this very brief amount of time, I guess the takeaways that I want to leave you with is that, SB 54 there is going to be producer responsibility on a spectrum of single-use products and packaging, and brand owners are going to be compelled to put a shitload of money on the table to develop mechanical recycling schemes to try to build circularity, and some of that will succeed. There will be examples of existing materials that are not doing very well in our recycling scheme that are going to do better. And there are examples in right now of products and materials that are moving in the right direction, and you can see how they're going to get to a point of circularity. But because of the frankly the very low value of producing a lot of these materials, it's like pushing a rock uphill. It is just going to be next to impossible to persuade the brand owners, the material producers, to internalize costs that they're going to perceive as, not making any sense for them. And so there is going to be tremendous failure within this. And is our policymakers going to be willing to pull the plug on those materials and products because they fail to meet the rates and dates that are in SB 54? And so I think that again, if you're in the material recycling world, SB 54 represents a potentially great opportunity to expand the recyclability and really to explore the recyclability and the source reduction of a variety of materials that are in our stream of commerce right now. But I'm not sure that we're going to be looking a decade from now and saying, this was the panacea. I think that there are some materials that are going to emerge as victors, and whether policymakers are willing to basically effectively stop allowing the production of materials that don't make the cut remains to be seen.
And that's going to be a learning process, I think, for all sides, because the objective here would be to take materials that are actually imposing very high costs, very high social and environmental costs, and move them out of the marketplace through this economic incentive of the cost, not to force materials that are worthless to be pushed uphill, as you say, and mechanically recycled at exorbitant cost and probably net negative impact. It's going to be a learning process. Really, SB 54 has just begun.
And Bill, I do want to. So in terms of that learning process, the immediate, if you're a CEO or a sustainability person or someone in the materials production world, the lesson is for this, and whether it's in packaging or in electronics or batteries or whatever it might be, is that you're much better off inventing your own circularity, coming up from day one with your own plan, rather than relying on government or a bunch of wacko environmentalists like me trying to regulate how you're going to do this. And so I'm going to continue to do my job, which is to push the limits and to micromanage, to continue, because I haven't learned the lesson. So continue to micromanage. But the fact is that the best way to avoid getting stuck in that quagmire is to develop your circularity from day one.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Laura Block, you have a question. Let's answer. Let's discuss
it.
Efficiently.
No, I mean, you kind of got to my point, and I guess I didn't push the lower hand button, was those ones that don't do it, and that encouraging, like you were saying, from design. Some of those things, it's like, look for alternatives. And I think that would be actually an opportunity for others, either the own or the others, just like with records. Like that went away, then it became, something different. Yeah. And really what you wanted to do is share music. So like when you get right down to it, what is it that they want to do, and how can they do it in a way designed from the beginning that that is circular.
Finding the product out of existence itself and just getting down to the service, the raw service.
Yeah.
Which is what can be done. David Chen, what's your question?
It's less a question and more of a comment. I used to work for a manufacturing company that basically changed their measurements from not just measuring themselves on how much they recycle during the manufacturing process, but how much of that recycled material is reused. And that led me to really think hard about how we approach circularity. If we're sitting here, back to that point with the butterfly chart, if we're sitting here focused only on recycling as a circular option, then we're missing out on the full process. And even
Mhm.
today, we're sitting here talking about the end product and the recyclability and the reusability of the end product. But there's a
Mhm.
lot of low-hanging fruit on the, even making that material, because there's substrates that are used, and there's fluids and materials and water, and all of that has to be circular. And in some cases is a lot easier to tackle because it's one source material. When we're talking about circularity on the end product, the biggest challenge is the variability of the product that has to be recycled. And that variability creates different kinds of complex problems that we're trying to solve. We should start back at the beginning and figure out how to help companies, measure and measure themselves not only on recyclability of their materials, but also the reusability. And one of the biggest, when we looked at reusability and recyclability in that process, we realized that shoveling that material back and
Mhm.
forth created a lot of greenhouse gases, because we're talking
Yeah.
about tonnages of material that you have to move around. But it wasn't big enough for any company to take and make a profit off of, right? Even with that tonnage, it was still too small. And
Mhm.
then when you looked at other on-site options, all had their own problems, which either was used too much water or had too many caustic materials, things like that. So you have to look at circularity not just in the design of that final product, but also the design of the overall company process. And that is expensive, it is complex. And when you're in a conservative company, it's something that's very hard to tackle unless you break it up into smaller chunks.
And it's our opportunity here with the leadership circle and with all the other circles that are developed around here to have conversations that allow those insights to be gained and knowledge to be gained, so that we're not in a position where everything has to be legislated and regulated a few years hence, and Mark can relax a little bit and come to Maui and join us here. But we can get there if we continue to converse about the opportunities, and that's what we're going to continue to do. Ram, I'm going to move on right now to Heidi Sanborn, if I may. Mark, are you done with?
Yeah, that's good.
Great. So Heidi, please, Heidi is also a decades-long friend and colleague, and probably ever present with her fingers on all of the EPR systems that are now exploding across the country. Heidi, give us a sense of what's up and where are we going?
What's up is pretty much everything that I've been working on for the last 34 years. So my background, just so you know, I was advisor to the chair of the Waste Management Board in California, and I went out and started the California Product Stewardship Council to advocate for EPR policies. And we were very, very successful starting in 2008. Did it for mercury thermostats, pharmaceuticals and needles, took a U.S. Supreme Court case from pharma, won. And so this has been a passion of mine for a long time, because I could see from the government perspective, we were regulating local governments, but we were not turning off the spigot. And if we want to really get source reduction and we really want to get cost-effective systems, it all starts at design, and that's where the producers lead, or they don't. And as Mark said, my advice to companies is the same. If you don't want to be regulated, manage yourself. Design for the environment, design for durability, design for reuse, refill, design for repairability. We're having to pass right to repair bills because companies won't even put their information on how you can disassemble and fix things anymore. So, there's a lot that can be done voluntarily. The problem is it isn't. And that's where Mark and I and others come in. So we don't want to do this. To me, legislation is the last resort, absolute last resort, because we can't always get it right. And it's really hard to do try to do a law that's flexible enough to adjust for markets and new materials and all the things. We do our best, but it's really, really hard. And the devil does live in the details with the actual regulation, which is where SB 54 is going wrong. I even had major problems with the regulations, and I thought they started too slow to get them started. I'm becoming more and more critical of state government because they're trying to grow government instead of let the producers really design and run the system. And that's creating huge overhead costs, which raises the cost of the program. And we're trying to get system costs down. And the voters have said they want affordability. So we all have to work together. And I think, as John said in your circularity thing, is, I've always said you can't close the loop on the material if you don't close the loop on the conversation. And the front end system hasn't been talking to the back end very long.
Let me leap ahead to a question that has been bothering me for about 40 years or so, but it's become more and more of a problem. And that is that in my view, in my experience, I think others will validate this, that the corporate government affairs industry has become expert at stopping things from happening, but not expert at driving solutions, at crafting solutions that are better than the ones that are legislated. And so what happens is that over a period of years, you have legislation that might have been conceived in 1970, that's passed in 1985, that's amended in 2010 or something, very old ideas that end up getting pushed in. And now, decades after, Coca-Cola started supporting EPR. Now the political marketplace is responding with EPR. Decades after, companies took positive positions. We haven't even got a carbon price yet, and the oil industry supports it. Like, Jesus, my goodness. So how do we get, and this is maybe a question that corporate folks can answer later, we're not going to answer it all today. How can we get the business community to recognize that it needs to invest in a proactive set of policy solutions early on, so that they don't end up creating a situation where they're spending billions and billions more than they needed to deal with legislation that they let get out of hand because they opposed it too strenuously without offering an alternative?
I wish I knew, because I've been talking directly to, I actually started going around government affairs people and going straight to company heads, because I could tell that they were controlling the information, and they make a lot more money in the fight as long as the fight keeps going. And they're out of the picture once the bill passes, usually. Yeah. So they have no financial interest, the lobbyists, in actually solving the problem.
So they need to be able to they need a financial interest in solving problems and a financial disinterest in not solving problems. There needs to be
a corporate contract thing. So when you hire a lobbyist, you can actually say, do we really have a problem here that needs to be solved? And if we do, maybe the answer is not just kill everybody else's ideas. Maybe come to the table so you're not on the menu. I've said that all the time. And yet companies won't listen. I can remember saying that on a panel. Mark, it was actually in your old building with Margot Reed Brown, who used to be the president of the board there, and then Wesley Chesbrough, to the pharmaceutical industry. They would not believe that we had a problem, and they kept denying it. And I kept saying, you're going to be on the menu. I'm telling you, there's a problem out there with needles sticking our workers and being flushed down the toilet and going out to sea. And then we have pharmaceuticals that are starting fueling an epidemic. If you don't do anything about it, we will. But that's what happened. And then we ended up getting sued to the U.S. Supreme Court, or challenged to the Supreme Court, and we won. But it was a very long, painful process that did not have to be that way.
And it tends to turn into a military battle and decades long of increasingly ideologically rigid ideas that are impermeable to change, even in the face of reality. So it gets difficult, and that's, again, the opportunity we have in this group to foster a conversation. Katie Disler, you had a comment. Did you want to make that to the group?
Yeah, sure. I just, coming from, I actually am head up sustainability for a plastics injection molding company that makes components and packaging for the consumer brand sector, industrial and healthcare, and kind of, and we also own our own recycling company and have been pushing for EPR from our angle. But what I'm seeing from the brands, the major multinational brands that we work with, are that consumers are not pushing for these solutions, nor are they willing to pay for them. So I get the argument that the brands should be moving proactively towards this in order to avoid the regulatory hammer. But until you get real close to that hammer coming down, it's significant expense in making changes to a lot of stuff. So that's just my opinion. So I just didn't know if we weren't talking about the US consumer at all in this conversation. So
I love that point. And I will tell you this. I just did a blog. You can go to our website, nsaction.us. And I just did a blog on who pays and who should pay. Because that is the question on SB 54. The goal here is that, yes, who controls the design and marketing decisions that decide what the end of life costs are? It's the producers, 100%. So we need to get them to have a financial stake in the game. We don't have a free market right now. We are socializing costs of wastes onto the back end taxpayer and ratepayer. So that market signal is not happening when the consumer makes the purchasing decision. We also have a problem with tooth and labeling. CAW and us, we co-sponsored a bill, SB 343, about the chasing arrow. They're putting chasing arrows as though everything's recyclable on plastic. It is not. And now they're going to have to hit standards in order to use that chasing arrow. But what does that tell the consumer? Oh, it's recyclable. Then they buy it. Then they put it in the recycling bin, and then we tell them that's bad, and we have to sort it out. So it's expensive. So your garbage rates are going up, and they're just like, wait a minute, what the heck's going on here? We have to send correct market signals to people that if they make the choice, they buy that product, they're paying for the end of life, and it's all handled, which is way more cost effective than every city and county in a state or a country figuring out their end of life system at the back end.
There's a tendency, I think, on the part of environmentalists like me and others to say, well, people should be willing to sacrifice, for the earth. And that's a fine virtue, I suppose. But the reality is, with the circular economy, our objective is to reduce costs for everybody across the board and to enhance prosperity across the board. Nature doesn't, produce less and less bounty and more suffering over time if you allow nature to evolve. Nature produces bounty even in the face of scarcity. And any policy that just imposes higher costs on business that they have to pass along to consumers that does not reflect lower environmental costs and taxpayer costs and so on, countervailing that, leading to a net reduction in costs, is not worthwhile. It's just imposing cost without benefit. So our guiding star should be that we're reducing costs and enhancing prosperity through circularity. And once we're very clearly doing that, the public is going to be excited about this, rather than saying, God, do I want to be more virtuous and pay more for everything? Or do I just need to get my kids to go to school and save enough money to get them through college?
I would also say that a lot of the costs they don't see, because again, it's the back end and socialized like landfills. And I don't know one person that wants to live next to a landfill or an incinerator.
Oh, when you see the destruction of the rainforest, you see, well, that's a cost of survival. And we don't want to destroy our rainforests, our coral reefs, our living systems. And that's a pretty high cost. So it's worth paying economically in order to survive and thrive, no doubt about it. But we need to make sure that we're actually saving the rainforests and the coral reefs and so on in this process, or we're just battering ourselves so we look good, at the gates of heaven, I suppose.
I put my
Bill, Bill, I just wanted to, I think that, if Heidi and I could design the system, we have that in mind in terms of reducing the overall costs. But the point is that the consumer sometimes is not seeing that benefit. They're seeing or being told about the price increase at the point of entry. I just want to note, Heidi mentioned 343, which is this kind of truth and environmental labeling policy that we worked on. I actually think that's starting to deliver and will deliver actually even faster than SB 54 in the sense of materials. It's very important to these brand owners to be able to tell their consumers, my product, this product you're buying, this package is recyclable. And when they can't say that, they perceive that as being an existential threat. And so we're starting to see that happening. And I think we're going to see one of those balls drop this week in terms of a material that is not going to make the cut, that has been making claims of recyclability. And I think that's going to send a signal to the marketplace.
That's fascinating. And again, that's just a truth in labeling law. That's information. We're putting information in the market. No heavy duty regulations there. And that information driving the change. So sometimes we don't need to batter people with a stick. We can
just tell the truth on the label.
Tell the truth. And
that's not saying that that's the be all and end all in terms of what, Heidi and I are trying to work towards. I mean, but it's motivating manufacturers to take action, to basically spend money, to figure out what do they need to do to use materials that are sustainable, that are circular, blah, blah, blah.
And I have good news on that front. We just had we did a truth in labeling bill on wipes years ago that they're not flushable. People flushed them during COVID, it was very stressful for people and costly. So we worked with Procter & Gamble and others. We got a negotiated agreement. It passed in California. It just passed the House and is in the Senate side at the national level, working together bipartisan. So these things can come together, and the sooner we come together, the faster we'll make improvements and keep costs down.
We just have a few more minutes for the discussion here, and I do want to invite anybody to put up your hand if you want to ask a question or make a comment here, and then we're going to hear from a special guest who has a special technology to discuss with us. Captain Hugo.
Hi. Well, thank you very much for the presentation, Heidi. I just wanted to put as an example what we are planning to do in our company, because we are going to develop the whale biomimicry reactor with thanks to our guest, right? In our science expedition cruise ship, the guest will finance the science. And I did have a question in the small meetings about Jeannie. Are you going to put that cost in the bill? Right. So it was, well, yes, it's going to be in the bill that we are going to charge for our passengers, because they will know exactly how much money will go to the science. But it's not that they will pay more, because finally what this will produce is something much more better, right? So that is also very, very kind of tricky, because if the passenger, in our case, the passenger of the cruise line will think, I will pay more for this. No, I will not go there, right? So, but if they think that it's just the price is competitive, and we have this 5% that we are going to charge for our guests for developing the science, is another way to say it, right? That you will finally produce a much more good impact in the oceans because of this science that we will develop. I don't know if I was clear in one way.
What you're doing is you're taking an industry that particularly not on cruise ships, but in cargo ships and illegal vessels and so on, is just dumping human excrement into the ocean in its state, or paying a lot to have that processed on land, and what you're creating is a product where you will be nourishing the ocean with the essentially substituting for whales that we have decimated, but nourishing the ocean as you go, and that is brilliant innovation that should reduce costs if people are paying the external costs of dumping human waste into the ocean, which many times right now. So you need, on the one hand, to have that cost transferred into the marketplace so that your offering is lower cost than others, so that the entire industry shifts to that. If you have the entire cargo and passenger ship industry shifting to a process like that, then you are suddenly saving the oceans rather than destroying the oceans. And
Exactly. Yeah.
capacity to absorb carbon. So any other questions
Thank you.
before we go to our special guest? And I'm going to ask Doozy to introduce our special guest for us. So I'm giving you an advance notice. Any other questions, comments? Any closing comments, Heidi, Mark, John?
Yeah, I'll just say that EPR is spreading across the country. We just had a battery EPR pass in Connecticut and in Nebraska. And we're seeing bills get introduced in Tennessee. We saw the recycling refund, which is producer responsibility in other states. Then California is a little bit different. We run our own government-run program, but the one in Texas got almost to the House floor. And that was pretty remarkable. That's the largest state left to have a recycling refund. So the progress being made and the discussions being had, I think the focus needs to be on costs, safety. Those are the winning arguments. The environmental, I've always, that might be my priority. I think money has to work for the things to work. And I've always said that. That's why I like EPR and I like a smaller government approach. But the government people are kind of trying to grow it. So we all have to work together to make sure that this works correctly and all these policies work well. But collaboration is going to be a lot cheaper and a lot faster if we all work together, but it's happening everywhere. Thanks.
Well, thank you folks for the overview. I think everybody's coming out of this with more knowledge and more insights about EPR and about circularity than we began. And we're going to be diving into it more over time. I am going to invite inventor Michael now to step forward. And Doozy, do you have anything you want to say about to introduce inventor Michael to us?
If you were at EarthX, you may have met or heard inventor Michael at EarthX. The other thing I wanted to say is that this is part of our now continuing effort to lift up work that's happening in the Leadership Circle community and to give time to community members to share about work that could use your support in various ways. And I will let inventor Michael introduce himself and his work.
Hello, everybody. I'm Michael. I'm inventor Michael on Instagram, and now that's just kind of my name. So I've been working on several different things that are from a different perspective, but from the same heart, if that makes sense. So I'm a systems engineer, and I specialize in a process called root cause analysis. And so I trace problems back to where they originate. And I actually started off with suffering, and it led me to money, and then money led me to fuel, and then fuel led me to engines, and then that led me to actually fixing it. So I took this truck to Dallas. This is a semi-truck here. Here's the turn. So this is a Volvo semi-truck that has a hybrid conversion system on it. This is solar recharged batteries, and this is battery-driven pumped electrolysis with oxygen injection. Okay, so this is now an official hybrid. It's the first of its kind in its own right. We filed 3 patents, and we are in the process of getting it to every single engine on planet Earth. So everything, you look outside your window, drive down the highway, we burn a ton of fuel as a civilization, and it seems to be an unsolvable thing where people are just like, yeah, Toyota got it right in 1994, and that's that, but like really, this is real-time creation of fuel using solar to drive and charge batteries that are brand new. So now, because of the breakthroughs in other industries, we've been able to use those batteries to store enough power to make a difference for this engine. This truck normally gets about 9 on the highway, and just the other day it got 19 at the pump. And so this can convert over, but because this is a circular economy reference that way, or meeting, I'm going to show you one more thing that we did that stops another type of waste. So this here, this is an old, what I would call a POS RV, that was turned into a strawberry grow. So this here, we turned this thing into a strawberry grow, and it'll be growing plants for us, and strawberries and potatoes. So people are like, what do you do with old RVs? This was not livable. No one wants to stay in that thing. So we gutted it, rebuilt it, turned it into a farm, and for the rest of my life, it will be a scientific plant research entity there. So I got this far in this job by converting 45 retired semi-trailers into self-contained solar-powered precision agriculture machines, and I've taught about 20 people how to start culinary mushroom farms in their community, and then microgreens and other plants that way. I wanted the idea of local farms everywhere, putting people to work, doing something that's purposeful and impactful. That turned out to be a very scary thing. The root cause of why we haven't sold many more units is that most people are terrified to start farms in their communities. And so we have been working with programs to get that food that they grow to the people that need it so that they can safely quit their jobs and buy our machines, while in the background, we carefully develop this system here. I will tell you that the reason I'm still in the situation I'm in, which is where I have a Reg D offering and a We Funder campaign for equity in this, the reason I'm still here is that predominantly most folks are scared of wayfinders. This has never been done like this before. That's never been done like that before. And thereby there's nothing to point to say, hey, that's a good idea. I mean, it obviously is a good idea. That's quite clear. But to say, hey, this works as a business and all the rest of that stuff, it scares the hell out of the market. So we are doing this, and we have the We Funder campaign up. We could really use some exposure because right now we're at a critical point with TikTok. TikTok has like shadow banned us or something that way. And so we are looking to get exposure out the rest of the way so that we can get this campaign done, because there's like 10,000 people that want this system for their semi-trucks and even more that want it for their pickup trucks as well. So it's been quite a long road. I've been at this for 12 years, and it's come a very long way.
Thank you, Michael, for everything that you're doing and for the inventiveness that you're showing there. And if anyone has any questions right now, we're happy to bring them forward. And if you'd like to learn more, you see in the chat a link to learn more and Michael's email as well, so you can converse with him directly. Are there any questions that folks have of Michael?
No. Hold on, before there's questions here, I will also tell you, you guys are all about recycling and dealing with stuff. The same strategy of real-time creation of fuel applies to my technology that's to follow, called clean loop incineration, and that's solar to hydrogen to incineration to water distillation, turning landfills into making power. So I know you want to reuse it all, but like I've been headed that direction for a while. Yeah, great. Now you'll get into trouble with just the use of the term incineration, because if incineration is a part of any process, you're going to have, that's a trigger word for a whole set of communities to become very eagerly opposed to. I have a permit. I got a permit from Colorado Department of Health and Environment, and it should be clean enough to where there is no pollution. I think that is likely true, and let me tell you that the pain will not be reduced. Yeah, I'm sure. By that. So it's more of a communication process. People need to know that it's clean up front, so that they are comfortable with it. And otherwise, people may erect impermeable barriers that shouldn't be there. So, well, the vehicles need it the most. All right. So like there's truck drivers that spend all day, every day locked in their cabs, and they make no money at the end of the month. Then I mean, like they're prisoners to that industry. And that's what we do this for. So we want to get that industry to be profitable again, and then that goes to trickle down change. So like right now, everyone's like, oh, they'll make more money, and then the groups that hire them, can charge less to do so as we go along. So I've said that there's no more important problem to solve than fuel and fuel consumption in our world. Thank you, Michael. We really appreciate what you're doing. And thank you, everyone, for participating. The official meeting is going to end in about 2 minutes here. We are going to go into the unofficial hangout, the coffee, and I'll probably switch to my patio out there with the ocean behind us. So nice. You can see what the heck's, where I am, this extraordinary place. But I want to thank everyone for participating in the discussion this month. Realize that you've got in the room with you here a wide variety of people. As we say, we like to bring together, we like to assure that we have all 10 of our categories in every meeting, and we endeavor to make sure that that happens. We'll be continuing to grow this community as we experience the topics and learn the people that need to come together to make these opportunities real. So thank you, everybody, for joining us.